Hi, my name is Joanna, and the night my sister Rebecca threw back her head and laughed when I told her I'd been let go from my corporate marketing job, she had no idea she was laughing at someone who was already making more in a month than she made in 3. She didn't know that while she was mocking my failure, I was quietly building an empire from my laptop in my tiny Denver apartment. But this wasn't just about money or success. It was about the years she'd spent putting me down, the dreams she'd dismissed, and the moment I finally decided I didn't owe her anything anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado autumn air was crisp as I pulled into the parking lot of Romano's, the Italian restaurant where our family had been meeting for Sunday dinners for the past 5 years. I sat in my modest Honda Civic for a moment, watching the golden leaves drift past my windshield, steeling myself for what was about to come. In my purse was the termination letter from Morrison Associates, the marketing firm where I'd worked for 2 years. The letter that would give Rebecca exactly what she'd been waiting for, proof that I was the family failure she'd always claimed I was. I'd been dreading this moment for 3 weeks now, ever since my boss called me into his office and delivered the news with all the warmth of a glacier. Budget cuts, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. Last hired, first fired, you understand. I understood, all right. I understood that my innovative campaign ideas had been too bold for their conservative client base. I understood that speaking up in meetings had marked me as difficult, and I understood that my departure would barely register as a footnote in their quarterly reports. What my family wouldn't understand, what I'd made sure they couldn't understand, was that losing that job was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Romano's was bustling with the usual Sunday crowd, families gathered around red-checkered tablecloths under warm yellow lighting. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air as I made my way to our usual corner booth. Rebecca was already there, of course, perfectly positioned so everyone could see her designer handbag and the diamond tennis bracelet Michael had bought her for their anniversary. Her auburn hair was styled in loose waves that probably cost more than most people's car payments, and her navy blazer screamed expensive even to the casual observer. Next to her sat Michael, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. He looked up briefly as I approached, offering a polite nod before returning to his screen. Our parents hadn't arrived yet, which meant I'd have to endure Rebecca's particular brand of sisterly concern, without any buffers. "Joanna!" Rebecca's voice carried that practiced warmth she'd perfected in her role as a pharmaceutical sales rep. "You look tired, honey. Everything okay?" I slid into the booth across from them, noting how she'd emphasized the word tired, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about my well-being. Rebecca had always been gifted at making observations that sounded caring, but were actually tiny daggers designed to chip away at your confidence. "I'm fine," I replied, hanging my jacket on the back of my chair. "Just busy with some projects." Michael glanced up from his phone. "Still doing the freelance thing?" There was no judgment in his voice, just mild curiosity. Michael had always been decent to me, which made it harder to understand what he saw in my sister. "Among other things," I said carefully. I'd learned over the years to keep my responses vague when it came to my work. The less information I gave Rebecca, the less ammunition she had. Rebecca leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. "You know, Joanna, I've been thinking about our conversation last month, about stability and planning for the future. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Have you given any more thought to applying for some full-time positions?" I could put in a word with some of my contacts. Here it was, the opening I'd been dreading. Rebecca's helpful suggestions always came wrapped in concern, but were really about highlighting my perceived shortcomings. In her world, success was measured by corner offices and company cars, not by the freedom to work from anywhere or the satisfaction of building something entirely your own. "Actually," I began, feeling my stomach tighten, "there's something I need to tell everyone about my job situation." Rebecca's eyes lit up with the kind of eager anticipation that made my skin crawl. She sensed drama, and drama was Rebecca's favorite entertainment, especially when it centered around my supposed failures. What kind of job situation? She asked, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes sharp as a hawk's. I took a breath. I was let go from Morrison Associates 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Michael looked up from his phone with genuine surprise, while Rebecca's expression cycled through shock, concern, and something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Oh, Joanna," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that probably looked supportive to outside observers. "I'm so sorry, what happened?" "Budget cuts," I explained, pulling my hand away from hers. "They had to reduce staff, and I was one of the newer hires." Rebecca's head tilted to one side, her expression morphing into what I'd come to recognize as her wise older sister mode. Never mind that she was only 18 months older than me, she wielded those months like a weapon whenever she wanted to establish her authority. "Well," she said, settling back in her seat with the air of someone preparing to deliver profound wisdom, "maybe this is a blessing in disguise. A chance to really think about what you want to do with your life." The words hit exactly as she'd intended them to. The implication was clear. I'd been drifting, unfocused, and now reality had finally caught up with me. In Rebecca's narrative, I was the irresponsible younger sister who jumped from job to job without any real direction or ambition. "I mean," she continued, her voice gaining momentum, "you've had, 6 different jobs in the past 4 years? Maybe it's time to find something with real stability. Real benefits. A career track." Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her, perhaps sensing the edge creeping into the conversation. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "maybe we should wait for your parents before." "No, it's fine," Rebecca interrupted, waving him off. "Joanna knows I only want what's best for her. That's what sisters are for, right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. This was exactly how these conversations always went. Rebecca would position herself as the concerned, successful sibling, while subtly undermining everything I'd accomplished. The fact that I'd been supporting myself perfectly well through a combination of freelance work and my growing online business was irrelevant in her worldview. What mattered was that I didn't fit her definition of success. "You know what you should do?" Rebecca was warming to her theme now, her eyes bright with the fervor of someone who genuinely believed she was being helpful. "You should look into sales. Pharmaceutical sales specifically. I could introduce you to some people. The money is good, and it's a stable industry. You'd have to start at the bottom, of course, but with your marketing background." "I appreciate the offer," I cut in, feeling heat rise in my cheeks, "but I'm not interested in pharmaceutical sales." Rebecca blinked, as if the concept of someone not wanting her career path was incomprehensible. "Why not?" "Joanna, you can't just keep floating from project to project forever. At some point, you need to grow up and make adult decisions about your future." The words hung in the air between us like a slap. Grow up. As if everything I'd been working toward, everything I'd built, was just childish playing around. As if the 16-hour days I'd been putting in developing my business were somehow less valid than her corporate job. "I have been making adult decisions," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "You just don't understand what they are." Rebecca laughed then. Not a gentle chuckle or even a dismissive snort, but a full-throated laugh that drew glances from nearby tables. The sound cut through me like broken glass, years of accumulated hurt crystallizing into that single moment. "Oh, Joanna," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, "you're calling freelance writing and whatever little projects you do adult decisions? Honey, you're almost 30. It's time to stop pretending that playing around on your laptop is a real career." The restaurant noise seemed to fade around us. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the familiar burn of humiliation that Rebecca had been expertly inflicting since we were children. But underneath the hurt was something else, something colder and more calculating. She had no idea what she'd just done. No idea that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "You think this is funny?" I asked quietly. "I think it's predictable," Rebecca replied, her laughter finally subsiding. "I've been watching you make these same mistakes for years. Jumping from job to job, chasing these fantasy careers, refusing to listen to advice from people who actually know what they're talking about. And now look where it's gotten you. Michael was staring at his wife with an expression I couldn't quite read. Discomfort, certainly, but also something that might have been disappointment. "Becca," he said softly, "that's enough." "No, Michael, it's not enough," Rebecca snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I'm tired of watching my sister waste her potential because she's too proud to admit she needs help. Too stubborn to accept that maybe, just maybe, the people who love her might know what's best for her." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "I need some air." "Running away again?" Rebecca called after me as I headed toward the door. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Joanna. You can't just leave every time someone tells you something you don't want to hear." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around, I might say something I couldn't take back. Something that would reveal exactly how wrong she was about everything. Outside, the evening air was sharp against my heated face. I leaned against my car, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. 7 missed calls from clients. 12 new messages in my business Slack channel. A notification that another payment had just hit my business account. A 5-figure payment for a consulting project I'd completed the week before. Rebecca thought I was a failure. She thought losing my corporate job was proof that I couldn't handle the real world, that my little projects were just elaborate ways of avoiding responsibility. She had no idea that those little projects had generated more revenue in the past 6 months than her pharmaceutical sales job paid in a year. She didn't know that I had clients in 3 different countries, that my expertise was in such demand that I'd started turning down work. Most importantly, she didn't know that I'd been planning to leave Morrison Associates for months, that getting fired had simply saved me the trouble of giving notice. My phone buzzed with a text from David, my business partner and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Client loved the presentation. They want to expand the project scope. Thinking 7 figures. Call me when you get a chance. 7 figures. While my sister sat in that restaurant, convinced she was delivering tough love to her irresponsible younger sister, I was looking at the possibility of the biggest deal of my career. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I thought about going back inside, about sitting through the rest of dinner while Rebecca continued her lecture about responsibility and planning for the future. I thought about nodding along while she offered to help me network with her contacts, about pretending gratitude for her condescending advice. Instead, I got in my car and drove home. My apartment was nothing to look at from the outside, a modest 1-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days. The parking lot was cracked, the building's exterior paint was peeling, and the mailboxes looked like they'd been installed sometime in the 1970s. It was exactly the kind of place that confirmed Rebecca's assumptions about my financial situation. What she didn't know was that I'd chosen this apartment deliberately. The rent was cheap enough that I could live comfortably while reinvesting most of my income back into my business. The neighbors were quiet, the internet was reliable, and nobody cared if I worked until 3 in the morning or took client calls at odd hours. Inside, my apartment told a different story. My home office took up the entire 2nd bedroom, equipped with professional lighting for video calls, multiple monitors, and a whiteboard covered with project timelines and revenue projections. The living room doubled as a meeting space when clients visited, furnished with pieces I'd carefully selected to project competence and success without ostentation. I kicked off my heels and settled at my desk, opening my laptop to review the proposal David had mentioned. The client was a Fortune 500 company, looking to completely overhaul their digital marketing strategy. The scope was massive, exactly the kind of project that would establish us as major players in the industry. As I worked, my phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my mother, who had apparently arrived at Romano's after my departure. "Where did you go, honey? Rebecca said you weren't feeling well." Then, 20 minutes later, "Rebecca told us about your job. We're here if you need to talk." I could imagine that conversation perfectly. Rebecca positioning herself as the concerned sister who'd tried to help but been rebuffed by my stubborn pride. My parents nodding sympathetically, agreeing that yes, Joanna had always been the difficult one, the one who refused to listen to good advice. They had no idea that while they were discussing my supposed failures over tiramisu, I was reviewing contracts that would change everything. The next morning, I woke to find 17 missed calls from Rebecca. When I finally listened to her voicemails, her tone had shifted from frustrated to worried to annoyed and back to worried again. "Joanna, call me back. I'm concerned about how you left last night. I know you're upset, but running away isn't going to solve anything. Seriously, Joe, this is ridiculous. I was trying to help you, and you're acting like I attacked you or something. Fine, be dramatic, but we need to talk about practical things. Like how you're going to pay your bills now that you don't have a job. Mom and Dad are worried." I deleted the messages without responding and spent the morning working on the Fortune 500 proposal. By lunch, I had a comprehensive strategy that would revolutionize their customer engagement approach. By dinner, David had called to tell me they wanted to meet in person to discuss implementation. "This could be it, Joe," he said, his excitement palpable even over the phone. "The deal that takes us to the next level." "I know," I replied, looking out my apartment window at the mountains in the distance. "I can feel it too." That night, as I fell asleep in my modest bedroom in my unremarkable apartment building, I thought about Rebecca's laughter, about the certainty in her voice when she'd dismissed my work as playing around, about the way she'd positioned herself as the successful sister generous enough to help her struggling sibling. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that while she'd been busy mocking my failures, I'd been building something that would make her pharmaceutical sales job look like pocket change. But she would find out soon enough. The universe, I was beginning to realize, had a sense of humor almost as sharp as Rebecca's had been that night at Romano's. And unlike my sister's laughter, the universe's jokes had a way of getting the last word. The call from David came at 7 the next morning, jarring me awake from dreams where Rebecca's laughter echoed through empty conference rooms. I fumbled for my phone, noting the excitement in his voice even through my sleep-fogged brain. "They want to meet Thursday," he said without preamble. "The entire executive team. They're flying in from New York specifically to discuss our proposal." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "All of them?" CEO, CMO, head of digital strategy, and their lead investor. "Joe, they're talking about a 3-year contract with expansion possibilities. This isn't just a project anymore. They want us to become their primary digital strategy partner." I walked to my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, and started the coffee maker with shaking hands. 3 years. The kind of contract that would establish Digital Horizon Solutions as a major player in the industry. The kind of contract that would make my business degree from University of Colorado finally mean something to my family. "What's the timeline?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my week. "Fast. They want to see a comprehensive presentation covering everything from initial audit to full implementation, market analysis, competitive research, projected ROI, the works. Think you can handle it?" I almost laughed. Could I handle it? I'd been preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity for 3 years, ever since David and I had officially partnered up. Every late night, every rejected pitch, every client who'd tried to lowball us because we were young and hungry, it had all been leading to this moment. "Send me everything you have," I said. "I'll start pulling together the research." After David hung up, I stood in my small kitchen watching the coffee drip into the pot and thinking about the irony of timing. Rebecca thought she'd delivered a crushing blow to my confidence 3 days ago at Romano's. Instead, she'd pushed me toward the biggest opportunity of my career. My phone buzzed with another call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, along with the 4 texts from Rebecca that had come in overnight. I couldn't deal with their concern and advice right now, not when I had work to do that would make their opinions irrelevant. The next 3 days passed in a blur of research, analysis, and preparation. I barely left my apartment, except to pick up groceries and meet with David at the co-working space downtown, where we officially kept our business address. The space was modern and professional, all glass walls and exposed brick, designed to impress clients who expected a certain aesthetic from their consultants. "You look like hell," David observed when I walked into our reserved conference room Wednesday afternoon, carrying my third cup of coffee of the day. "Thank you for that confidence boost," I replied, spreading printouts across the table. "But look at this data." For the next 2 hours, we refined our presentation until it was razor sharp. David handled the technical implementation while I focused on market strategy and competitive analysis. Together, we'd identified gaps in the client's current approach that were costing them millions in lost revenue. "They're going to love this," David said, reviewing our projected ROI calculations, especially the part about customer lifetime value optimization. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow's meeting would change everything, not just for the business, but for how I saw myself in relation to my family. For 3 years, I'd been building something significant while they'd watched from the sidelines, offering unsolicited advice about stability and conventional career paths. Rebecca had made it clear that she saw my work as a hobby, something I did to avoid getting a real job. Tomorrow, I'd have the chance to prove exactly how wrong she was. My phone rang as I was packing up my materials. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen, and this time I decided to answer. "Finally," she said, her relief palpable. "I've been worried sick. Mom said you haven't returned any of her calls." "I've been busy," I replied, not bothering to elaborate. "Busy with what?" "Joanna, you lost your job. You should be out there networking, sending resumes, not hiding in your apartment feeling sorry for yourself." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. "I'm not feeling sorry for myself, Rebecca. I'm working." "Working on what?" Her voice carried that familiar note of skepticism. "Jo, I know you're upset about what happened at dinner, but ignoring reality isn't going to help. You need income, you need benefits, you need a plan." "I have a plan," Rebecca sighed dramatically. "Look, I've been thinking about our conversation Sunday night. Maybe I came across as harsh, but someone needs to tell you the truth. You can't keep bouncing between these freelance gigs forever. What happens when you get sick? What happens when you want to buy a house or start a family? You need stability." I found myself walking to my office window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, executives from New York were preparing to offer my company a contract worth more than Rebecca made in 5 years. The disconnect between her perception and my reality was so vast it made my head spin. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm doing fine." "Are you, though?" Rebecca's voice softened, taking on the tone she used when she thought she was being especially wise and compassionate. "Jo, losing a job is traumatic. It's okay to admit you're struggling. Michael and I have been talking, and we want to help." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Help? How?" "Well, you know Michael's company is always looking for good people. It's not marketing, exactly, but they need someone to handle their social media accounts. Entry level, but it comes with full benefits and room for growth. I could put in a word. Entry-level social media management. After building a business that specialized in comprehensive digital strategy for Fortune 500 companies, my sister wanted to help me get an entry-level social media job through her husband's connections. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, "but I don't think that's the right fit for me." "Why not?" Rebecca's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Joanna, you can't afford to be picky right now. This is exactly what I was talking about Sunday. You're so focused on these impossible dreams that you're missing real opportunities." "They're not impossible dreams, Rebecca." "Then where are they?" she snapped. "Where are these amazing opportunities you keep talking about? Because from where I'm sitting, you just lost your job and you're living in a rundown apartment complex, driving a car that's older than some of my interns." The words stung, because they weren't entirely wrong. I had chosen to live modestly, to reinvest my profits back into the business rather than upgrading my lifestyle. To Rebecca, who measured success by visible status symbols, my choices looked like failure. "Some things are more important than appearances," I said. "Like what? Like pride?" "Joanna, pride doesn't pay the bills. Pride doesn't give you health insurance or a retirement plan. At some point, you need to be practical." I heard David's voice in the background at the co-working space, confirming our meeting location for tomorrow. In less than 18 hours, I'd be sitting across from executives who'd flown in specifically to discuss a multi-million-dollar partnership with my company. The absurdity of having this conversation with Rebecca right now was almost overwhelming. I have to go, I said. Wait, don't hang up. Can we please talk about this like adults? I'm trying to help you here. I know you are. Then why won't you listen to me? Why won't you consider that maybe, just maybe, I know what I'm talking about? I've been in the corporate world for 7 years, Joanna. I've seen how these things work. And I appreciate your experience, I replied, though appreciation was the last thing I felt. But I really do have to go. I have a client meeting to prepare for. Rebecca's laugh was shorter this time, but no less cutting. A client meeting? Right. What kind of client meeting? The kind that pays the bills, I said, and hung up before she could respond. That night, I barely slept. I ran through the presentation dozens of times, anticipating questions, refining talking points, preparing for every possible scenario. But underneath the professional preparation was something more personal, a burning need to prove that Rebecca's assessment of my life was fundamentally wrong. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Denver autumn weather. I dressed carefully in my best suit, a charcoal gray number I'd bought specifically for high-stakes client meetings. In the mirror, I looked competent, professional, successful, everything Rebecca claimed I wasn't. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. I arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to review my notes one final time and center myself. David met me in the lobby, looking unusually nervous. "You ready for this?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the top floor. "More than ready," I replied, and meant it. The conference room overlooked the entire city, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. 4 people sat around a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. Jennifer Walsh, the CEO, Marcus Thompson, CMO, Sarah Chen, head of digital strategy, and Robert Martinez, the lead investor David had mentioned. Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Harrison, Jennifer Walsh, stood to greet us, her handshake firm and direct. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, setting up my laptop while David distributed printed copies of our proposal. For the next 90 minutes, we walked them through our analysis, our strategy, and our implementation timeline. I watched their faces carefully, noting when Marcus leaned forward during the competitive analysis section, when Sarah nodded during our discussion of customer segmentation, when Robert's eyebrows raised at our projected ROI figures. "These numbers," Robert said finally, tapping the financial projections, "they seem aggressive." "They're based on similar implementations we've done for companies in adjacent markets," I explained, pulling up case studies on my laptop. "We've consistently delivered results that exceed initial projections by 15 to 20%. Jennifer Walsh studied the case studies with obvious interest. "How long have you two been working together?" 3 years as official partners, David replied. "But we've been collaborating on digital strategy projects for 5 years. "And your background, Ms. Rodriguez?" Marcus asked, though I suspected they'd already researched us thoroughly. "Business degree from University of Colorado, followed by 2 years in traditional marketing before transitioning to digital strategy. I've been focusing exclusively on comprehensive digital transformation for the past 4 years." What I didn't mention was that the traditional marketing had been at Morrison Associates, the job I'd supposedly lost due to budget cuts. What I also didn't mention was that I'd been planning my exit from that job for months, waiting for the right moment to transition full-time to Digital Horizon Solutions. "The implementation timeline is ambitious," Sarah noted, "but the strategy is exactly what we've been looking for. Someone who understands that digital transformation isn't just about technology, it's about fundamentally changing how we engage with customers." Jennifer Walsh looked around the table at her colleagues, some silent communication passing between them. "We'd like to move forward," she said finally, "not just with this project but with the partnership model you've outlined." David and I exchanged glances. This was it. The moment that would change everything. "We're talking about a 3-year contract," Robert continued, "with built-in expansion milestones. If you hit your targets in year 1, we'll discuss bringing you in for our European operations as well." The numbers they proposed were staggering. More than I dared to hope for. Enough to establish Digital Horizon Solutions as a major player in the industry overnight. Enough to make Rebecca's pharmaceutical sales salary look like pocket change. "We'll need some time to review the contract details," I managed. though every instinct was screaming at me to accept immediately. Of course, Jennifer Walsh smiled. But we'd like to start the preliminary work as soon as possible. The untrapsor. Market research alone will take several weeks, and we want to begin implementation by the new year. As we shook hands and exchanged business cards, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just a business deal. It was validation of every choice I'd made, every risk I'd taken, every night I'd worked until dawn, while Rebecca slept peacefully in her suburban home, confident in her superiority. "Congratulations," David said, as we waited for the elevator. "We did it." "No," I replied, watching the city spread out below us through the lobby windows. "We're just getting started." The first person I called wasn't Rebecca or my parents. It was my accountant, asking her to review the contract when it arrived. The second call was to my lawyer, arranging a meeting to discuss the legal implications of expanding our business operations. It wasn't until I was driving home, NPR playing softly in the background, that I allowed myself to think about what this meant for my family relationships. Rebecca had spent 3 years assuming I was struggling, jumping from project to project without any real direction or success. She'd positioned herself as the responsible older sister, generous enough to offer advice to her wayward sibling. Tomorrow, when the contract was finalized and the press release went out announcing our partnership, she'd learn exactly how wrong she'd been. My phone buzzed with a text from her as I pulled into my apartment complex. "Thinking about you today. Hope your client meeting went well. Call me when you get a chance." The quotation marks around client meetings said everything. She still thought I was playing dress-up, pretending to have a real business while actually scrambling to find legitimate work. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Tomorrow, Rebecca would wake up to a very different world than the one she'd gone to sleep in. A world where her younger sister wasn't the family failure she'd always assumed. The irony was delicious, but it was also tinged with something darker. For 3 years I'd let my family believe I was struggling, because it was easier than explaining what I was really building. I'd chosen to be underestimated, because it gave me the freedom to work without their interference or expectations. Now that freedom was about to end. And with it, the comfortable dynamic that had allowed Rebecca to feel superior while I quietly built something extraordinary. She had no idea what was coming. But she would find out soon enough. That evening, as I reviewed the preliminary contract David had forwarded, I thought about the last 3 days. Rebecca's laughter at Romano's, her condescending offers of help, her certainty that she understood my life better than I did. All of it based on the assumption that visible success was the only success that mattered. Tomorrow those assumptions would crumble. And for the first time in 3 years, I would have to decide whether to be gracious in victory or to let Rebecca experience the same humiliation she'd so casually inflicted on me. The choice, I realized, was entirely mine to make. The call came at 6 in the morning on Friday, jolting me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. My mother's voice was strained, barely controlled panic bleeding through her usual composure. "Joanna, thank God you answered. Something's happened to Rebecca." I sat up immediately, my heart racing. "What do you mean something's happened?" "She's in the hospital. They brought her in around midnight. Michael called us from the emergency room." My mother's voice cracked. "She collapsed at some work event. They think it might be her heart." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Rebecca was only 31, healthy, athletic. Heart problems didn't run in our family. "Which hospital?" "Presbyterian St. Joseph. Michael's there now, but he's not making much sense. Something about stress and exhaustion and—" She trailed off, unable to finish. I was already reaching for clothes, my mind racing through logistics. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Joanna, there's something else." My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Michael mentioned something about work problems. About Rebecca possibly losing her job. Did you know anything about that?" The irony hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been celebrating my business success, my sister had apparently been fighting battles I knew nothing about. "No, Mom. I had no idea." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of early morning traffic and mounting anxiety. Despite everything between Rebecca and me, the thought of her in serious medical trouble made my stomach clench with fear. Our relationship might be complicated, but she was still my sister. I found Michael in the cardiac unit waiting room, slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair with his head in his hands. He looked up when I approached, and I was shocked by his appearance. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed from either exhaustion or tears. "Joanna," he said, standing to embrace me awkwardly. "Thanks for coming. How is she?" "Stable, but they're running more tests. The doctor said it was likely a combination of severe stress and exhaustion that triggered an irregular heartbeat. She'll be okay, but—" He sank back into his chair. "She's been hiding how bad things have gotten." I took the seat beside him. "What things?" Michael rubbed his face with both hands. "Her job. She's been on a performance improvement plan for 2 months. Apparently, some of her client relationships went south, and her sales numbers have been declining. Her manager's been pressuring her to turn things around or face termination." The information felt surreal. Rebecca, who'd built her identity around professional success, who'd spent years lecturing me about career stability, had been secretly struggling with her own job security. "She never said anything to any of us," I murmured. "She was ashamed," Michael explained. "You know how Rebecca is about appearances. She couldn't bear the thought of admitting she was having problems, especially after—" He looked at me with something that might have been apology. "Especially after how she talked to you about your job situation." A doctor in scrubs approached us, checking a tablet. "Are you here for Rebecca Martinez?" "Yes," Michael stood quickly. "I'm her husband. This is her sister. She's awake and asking for family. You can see her now, but please keep the visit brief. She needs rest." Rebecca looked small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped softly in the sterile room. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale without makeup. She looked younger than I'd seen her in years, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. "Hey," she said weakly when she saw us enter. "Hey yourself," I replied, moving to stand beside her bed. "You scared us." "I'm okay," she said automatically, then seemed to realize the absurdity of the statement given her current location. "I will be okay." Michael took her hand gently. "The doctor says you need to reduce stress. Take some time off work." Rebecca's face tightened. "I can't take time off. Not now. The quarterly reviews are next week, and if my numbers don't improve—" "Becca," Michael's voice was firm, "your health is more important than any job." "Easy for you to say," she snapped, then immediately looked apologetic. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. It's just, you don't understand. I've worked so hard to get where I am. If I lose this position now, what does that say about everything I've built?" I felt a strange sense of recognition in her words. The fear of losing professional identity, of having your worth questioned by people who mattered to you. It was uncomfortably familiar. "Maybe it says that one job doesn't define your entire value as a person," I said quietly. Rebecca looked at me with surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was there. "That's different, Joanna. You never really cared about corporate success the way I do." The comment stung, partly because it revealed how little she understood about my motivations, and partly because there was some truth to it. I had chosen a different path, but that didn't mean I cared any less about success. I just defined it differently. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "what happened at work?" Michael mentioned client problems. Her face crumpled slightly. "Everything's falling apart. 3 of my biggest accounts decided not to renew their contracts. My manager says it's because I've been too aggressive in my sales approach, but I was just trying to hit my targets. And now they're saying I need to rebuild trust with existing clients while also bringing in new business, and the timeline they've given me is impossible." Michael squeezed her hand. "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" "Because I thought I could fix it," Rebecca whispered. "I thought if I just worked harder, stayed later, made more calls, I thought I could turn it around before anyone had to know." The parallels to my own recent experience weren't lost on me. While Rebecca had been publicly mocking my job loss, she'd been privately terrified of experiencing the same thing herself. The irony was painful for both of us. "How long have you been dealing with this?" I asked. 4 months, she admitted, ever since the Henderson account pulled out. That was my biggest client, and when they left, it started a domino effect. Other clients started questioning whether they were getting value for their money. I found myself thinking about the Digital Horizon Solutions contract, about the validation and security it represented. Yesterday, I'd been riding high on professional triumph, while my sister had been drowning in professional failure. "The worst part," Rebecca continued, "is that everyone at work knows. They all whisper when I walk by, wondering when I'll be the next one let go. And I keep thinking about what I said to you at dinner last week, about job security and making adult decisions, and I feel like such a hypocrite." Michael and I exchanged glances. Neither of us seemed to know what to say. "The stress has been eating me alive," Rebecca went on. "I haven't been sleeping. I've been snapping at Michael over stupid things. I even canceled our anniversary dinner because I had to work late trying to salvage the Peterson account." Her voice broke. "And last night at the company mixer, when my manager pulled me aside to tell me that my performance review had been moved up, I couldn't breathe. Everything went black. I felt a complex mix of emotions watching my sister fall apart. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would work out. Another part of me remembered her laughter at Romano's, her dismissive comments about my career choices, her certainty that she knew better than I did about professional success. "Maybe this is a sign," Michael said gently. "Maybe it's time to consider other options. You're talented, Becca. There are other companies, other opportunities." "Other opportunities doing what?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly, causing one of the monitors to beep faster. "This is what I know. This is what I'm good at. Or what I thought I was good at." A nurse appeared in the doorway, checking the monitor readings. "I'm going to need to ask you to keep things calm in here. Mrs. Martinez needs to rest." "We should go," I said, though I felt reluctant to leave Rebecca in this state. "Wait." Rebecca grabbed my hand as I started to move away from the bed. "Joanna, I owe you an apology. What I said at dinner, the way I laughed at you. It was awful. I was projecting my own fears onto you, and that wasn't fair." I looked down at her hand holding mine, surprised by the admission. "Rebecca, no, let me finish. I've been so terrified of failing that I convinced myself everyone else was failing instead. When you told us about losing your job, I felt this horrible sense of relief, because it meant I wasn't the only one struggling. And that's a terrible thing to admit, but it's true." The honesty in her voice was startling. This vulnerable, self-aware Rebecca was someone I rarely saw. "I've spent so much energy trying to prove I was the successful sister that I forgot to actually be supportive," she continued. "And now look at me. I'm the one falling apart while you're out there handling your situation with dignity and grace." If only she knew, I thought. If only she knew that while she'd been struggling with failing client relationships, I'd been signing the biggest contract of my career. The guilt sat heavy in my stomach. "We all handle things differently," I said carefully. "You're being too kind," Rebecca said, releasing my hand. "I know I've been awful to you about your career choices. I always assumed I knew better, but maybe I was wrong about a lot of things." Michael stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional intensity. "I'm going to get some coffee. Can I bring anyone anything?" After he left, Rebecca and I sat in silence for a moment. The monitors continued their steady beeping, and somewhere down the hall I could hear the murmur of medical staff discussing patient care. "Joanna," Rebecca said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you do it? How do you handle uncertainty without falling apart? Because I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to swim anymore." The question hit me hard because it revealed how fundamentally she'd misunderstood my situation. She thought I was handling uncertainty with grace, when actually I'd been building towards certainty for years. She thought I was struggling when I was thriving. The gap between perception and reality felt insurmountable. "I think," I said slowly, The key is remembering that your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions of your choices. That's easy to say when you don't have to worry about impressing clients or hitting sales targets. Again, the irony was almost unbearable. I thought about Jennifer Walsh and the Digital Horizon Solutions team, about the pressure of presenting to executives who could make or break our company's future. Rebecca assumed my freelance work was low pressure because she didn't understand the stakes involved. Every job has its own pressures, I said diplomatically. Maybe, Rebecca conceded, but at least your work is something you chose, something you're passionate about. I feel like I fell into pharmaceutical sales because it seemed like a smart career move, and now I don't know if I even like it anymore. The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing. David's name appeared on the screen, and I knew it was probably about the contract details we'd been negotiating. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Take it," Rebecca said, noticing my hesitation. "I know you're busy with your projects." I stepped into the hallway to answer. "Hey, David. Joe, you're not going to believe this. They want to accelerate the timeline. Jennifer Walsh just called. They want to announce our partnership at their investor meeting next Tuesday. We're talking about a press release, potential media coverage, the whole thing." My heart started racing. Tuesday was 4 days away. A public announcement would make everything official, visible, impossible to downplay or hide from my family. "That's amazing," I said, though my voice probably didn't convey the enthusiasm David was expecting. "You sound weird. Everything okay?" I glanced back toward Rebecca's room, where I could see her through the doorway, looking small and defeated in the hospital bed. "Family stuff. Can we talk about this later?" "Sure. But Joe, this is huge. This announcement could lead to similar partnerships with other Fortune 500 companies. We're about to become major players in the industry." After hanging up, I stood in the hospital corridor feeling the weight of competing loyalties. My sister was facing the possible collapse of her professional identity, while I was about to achieve the kind of success she'd always claimed to value above everything else. The timing felt cruel, as if the universe was playing an elaborate joke on both of us. When I returned to Rebecca's room, she was staring out the window at the Denver skyline. "Everything okay with your client?" "Yeah," I said, sitting back down. "Just some scheduling details." "You're lucky, you know," she said without looking at me. "Having work that you can manage from anywhere, that doesn't depend on office politics or quarterly reviews. I used to think it was irresponsible, but maybe it's actually smarter." The comment left me speechless. After years of positioning corporate employment as superior to freelance work, Rebecca was now envying the very freedom she'd once dismissed. "Grass is always greener," I said weakly. "Maybe? Or maybe I've just been looking at the wrong grass this whole time." As visiting hours ended and I prepared to leave the hospital, I found myself in an impossible position. In 4 days, my professional success would become public knowledge. Rebecca would learn that while she'd been condescending about my career choices, I'd been building something extraordinary. She'd realize that her assumptions about my struggles had been completely wrong. Under normal circumstances, the revelation would feel like sweet vindication. But seeing her broken and vulnerable in that hospital bed, admitting her own failures and asking for my advice on handling uncertainty, the prospect of that revelation felt more complicated. She had no idea what was coming. And for the first time since signing the Digital Horizon Solutions contract, I wasn't sure I wanted her to find out. The press release went live at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, exactly as planned. I watched the notification pop up on my phone while sitting in my car outside the hospital, preparing for another visit with Rebecca. My hands trembled slightly as I read the headline, "Digital Horizon Solutions partners with Technova Industries in groundbreaking 3-year strategic alliance." The article detailed everything: the scope of our work, the projected revenue impact, the expansion possibilities. Most importantly, it quoted Jennifer Walsh describing Digital Horizon Solutions as one of the most innovative digital strategy firms we've encountered, and specifically mentioning my role as co-founder and lead strategist. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone in my family saw it. The Denver Business Journal had picked up the story, along with several industry publications. In the age of social media and professional networking sites, news traveled fast, especially when it involved local success stories. I was right. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it to the hospital entrance. Joanna? My father's voice carried a mixture of confusion and excitement. I just got a call from Jim Patterson. You remember Jim from the country club? He saw an article about some partnership with a tech company, and your name was mentioned. He said congratulations, but I had no idea what he was talking about. I stopped walking, standing in the hospital parking garage while other visitors streamed past me. Dad, I can explain. Explain what? The article makes it sound like you own some kind of consulting company. A successful one. But that doesn't make sense because you just lost your job at that marketing firm. The complexity of trying to unravel 3 years of deliberate misdirection suddenly felt overwhelming. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it, my father said, his voice taking on the firm tone I remembered from childhood. Are you telling me you've been running a business this whole time, while we thought you were struggling to find steady work? I closed my eyes, leaning against a concrete pillar. Yes. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, my father spoke again. How long? 3 years as an official partnership. 5 years of building toward it. And you never told us because nobody asked, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Because every time I tried to explain what I was doing, someone would interrupt with advice about getting a real job or suggestions for more stable career paths. Jesus, Joanna. My father's voice was quiet now. The article mentions figures. Revenue projections. This isn't some small operation, is it? No, Dad, it's not. Your mother's going to want to talk to you. Hell, I want to talk to you. But first, does Rebecca know? My stomach dropped. No, she's been in the hospital since Friday. Right, of course. Poor timing. He paused. Or maybe it's perfect timing. She's been beating herself up about her work situation, and you've been sitting on this success story the whole time. It's not that simple. Isn't it? My father's tone was shifting, taking on an edge I recognized. Your sister's been worried sick about you, offering to help with job searches and networking. Meanwhile, you've been closing deals with Fortune 500 companies. That doesn't strike you as a little dishonest? The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. I never lied to anyone. You didn't tell the truth either. After hanging up, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to compose myself before going upstairs to see Rebecca. The conversation with my father had revealed something I'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. My family's perception of my struggles hadn't just been their assumption. I'd actively cultivated it. Every vague response about my work, every deflection when they asked about my income, every time I'd let them worry about my financial stability while knowing I was doing better than any of them. It had all been deliberate. I'd told myself it was about privacy, about avoiding their interference. But maybe it had also been about something else. Maybe it had been about letting them underestimate me because it felt safer than risking their judgment if I failed. Now that safety was gone, the truth was public, undeniable, and spreading through our social circle faster than I could control. Rebecca was sitting up in bed when I arrived, looking better than she had since Friday. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and her hair was pulled back in a neater ponytail. She was scrolling through her phone but looked up with a smile when I entered. You look like hell, she said with affection. Are you sleeping? Not much, I admitted, taking the chair beside her bed. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor says I can probably go home tomorrow if my stress levels stay down. She set her phone aside. Michael's been amazing. He took time off work to stay with me, and he's been handling all the insurance paperwork and everything. That's good. Rebecca studied my face. You seem tense. Is everything okay? I wondered how long I had before she found out. In the old days, news like this might have taken weeks to filter through family networks. But in the digital age, with LinkedIn notifications and Google alerts and social media shares, I probably had hours at most. Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you. That sounds ominous. She tried to smile, but I could see wariness creeping into her expression. It's about my work situation, about what I've been doing since leaving Morrison Associates. Okay, she sat up straighter, giving me her full attention. I wasn't entirely honest about my financial situation or my professional situation. I've been running a consulting business for the past 3 years, and it's been more successful than I let anyone believe. Rebecca blinked slowly. What do you mean by successful? I mean that losing my job at Morrison wasn't a catastrophe. It was actually a relief, because it meant I could focus full-time on my own company. And yesterday, we signed a contract with a Fortune 500 company that's going to make us major players in the digital strategy industry. The words hung in the air between us. Rebecca's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hurt. You've been running a successful business this whole time? She asked quietly. Yes. While I was lecturing you about job security and career planning, yes. While I was offering to help you find entry-level positions through Michael's connections, I nodded, unable to speak. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. How successful are we talking about? Very, I said simply. More successful than my pharmaceutical sales position? The direct question demanded a direct answer. Significantly more. Something shifted in. Rebecca's expression, a hardening around her eyes that I recognized from our childhood arguments. And you just let me make a fool of myself? You let me sit there at Romano's, lecturing you about responsibility and adult decisions, knowing the whole time that you were out earning me? It wasn't about the money, Rebecca. Wasn't it? Her voice was getting sharper, despite the hospital setting. Then what was it about? Why would you let your own family worry about you unnecessarily? Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you dismissed it. You called it playing around on my laptop. You said I needed to grow up and get a real job. Because I didn't understand what you were actually doing. Rebecca's voice rose, causing the heart monitor to beep faster. How could I understand when you never explained it properly? I tried to explain it. You didn't want to listen. I wanted to help you. You wanted to fix me, I corrected. There's a difference. A nurse appeared in the doorway, checking the monitor readings with concern. I'm going to need you to keep your voices down. Mrs. Martinez needs to avoid stress. Rebecca waved her away impatiently. We're fine. After the nurse left, Rebecca stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. This is why you've been so calm about everything, isn't it? Why you didn't seem panicked about losing your job. Why you weren't interested in my suggestions for networking or applying for new positions. Partly, yes. And the press release that went out this morning about Digital Horizon Solutions partnering with Technova Industries. That's you. My heart sank. She'd already seen it. How did you? Michael's assistant saw it on LinkedIn and forwarded it to him because she remembered my last name. He showed it to me an hour ago. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. I've been lying here trying to figure out how to process this information. Rebecca, I know how this looks. Do you? She interrupted. Do you know how it looks to find out that your sister has been essentially lying to you for 3 years? That while you've been genuinely worried about her financial stability, she's been quietly building a multi-million-dollar business? I never lied about anything. You lied by omission. You let us all believe you were struggling when you weren't. You let me make condescending comments about your career choices when you were actually more successful than I've ever been. Her voice cracked slightly. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I felt a flash of anger. Humiliating? Rebecca, you laughed at me. You dismissed my work as playing around. You offered me entry-level jobs through your husband's connections because you thought I was too incompetent to find anything better myself. Because I thought you needed help. Because you enjoyed feeling superior. I shot back. Because it made you feel better about your own insecurities to have a sister who appeared to be failing. The accusation hit its mark. Rebecca's face flushed, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had when we were children, and I'd caught her in some petty cruelty. That's not fair, she said weakly. Isn't it? You said so yourself last week, that my job loss made you feel relieved because it meant you weren't the only one struggling. You've been using my apparent failures to make yourself feel better about your own problems. Rebecca closed her eyes, leaning back against her pillows. God, this is a nightmare. Why? Because you can't be the successful sister anymore? Because I've been such a complete bitch to you for no reason, she said, opening her eyes to look at me. Because I've spent 3 years acting like I knew better than you about everything, and it turns out I was wrong about literally everything. The admission caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, justification, maybe even anger. I hadn't expected this raw acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Joanna, Rebecca continued, I need you to understand something. When I was lecturing you about career stability and making adult decisions, I genuinely believed I was helping. I thought I was being a good sister. By being condescending and dismissive, by sharing what I thought was valuable experience. I worked hard to build my career, to establish myself in a competitive industry. When I saw you jumping between what looked like temporary gigs, I thought... She trailed off, shaking her head. I thought you were wasting your potential. And now? Now I realize that you were building something incredible while I was too narrow-minded to see it. You were taking risks and creating opportunities while I was playing it safe with a corporate job that's apparently falling apart anyway. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the hospital, phones ringing, conversations in the hallway, the distant ping of elevator doors. The normalcy of it all felt surreal given the conversation we'd just had. The worst part, Rebecca said finally, is that while I was mocking your career choices, you were actually living the kind of professional life I've always claimed to want. Independent, successful, building something meaningful. And instead of recognizing that, I was so caught up in traditional markers of success that I completely missed what you were accomplishing. Rebecca? No, let me finish. She held up a hand. I've been lying here for the past hour, thinking about every conversation we've had about work over the past 3 years. Every piece of unsolicited advice I gave you, every concerned comment about your lack of direction, every time I positioned myself as the responsible sister who had her life together. Her voice was getting thick with emotion. And the whole time, you were succeeding beyond anything I've ever achieved. You were building a business, creating something valuable, making a real impact. While I was following someone else's playbook and calling it success. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected to have. I'd braced myself for Rebecca's anger, her defensiveness, her need to justify her behavior. I hadn't prepared for this level of honest self-reflection. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh, every time I made you feel like your choices weren't valid. You were right to keep this from us. We didn't deserve to know. The apology hung between us, more genuine than anything Rebecca had ever said to me, but it also highlighted the fundamental problem we still faced. The years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding couldn't be erased by a single conversation, no matter how honest. The question now, Rebecca said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, is whether you can ever forgive me for being such a terrible sister, and whether there's any way to rebuild our relationship from here. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Stripped of her usual confidence and professional armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more human than I'd seen her since we were children. The Rebecca sitting in this hospital bed wasn't the successful pharmaceutical sales representative who'd lectured me about career stability. She was just a woman who'd made mistakes and was brave enough to acknowledge them. But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I could decide in a moment. The hurt was too deep, too ingrained in years of accumulated slights and dismissals. Rebecca's apology was genuine, but it didn't undo the damage that had been done. I don't know, I said honestly. I need time to think about all of this. Rebecca nodded, though I could see disappointment flicker across her face. I understand. I've had 3 years to be awful to you. I suppose you deserve more than 3 hours to decide whether you can forgive me. My phone buzzed with another call from my father, probably wanting to discuss what he'd learned about my business. Soon my mother would call, then extended family, then family friends. The news would spread through our social circle like wildfire, and everyone would want explanations. I should go, I said, standing up. David needs to brief me on some media interviews, and I have a feeling my phone's going to be ringing all day. Media interviews, Rebecca repeated with a weak smile. God, Joanna, you've really made it, haven't you? We'll see, I replied, though I knew the answer was yes. I had made it, in ways that Rebecca was only beginning to understand. As I reached the door, Rebecca called my name. Joanna, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, given how I've acted, but I am. What you've built is incredible. I turned back to look at her one more time, this sister who'd spent years making me feel small, and was now looking at me with something approaching awe. Thank you, I said, and meant it. But as I walked toward the elevator, I realized that Rebecca's pride, no matter how genuine, couldn't undo the years of damage. The roles had reversed completely. She was now the sister facing professional uncertainty, while I had achieved the kind of success she'd always claimed to value. The question was, what would I do with that reversal? Would I be gracious in victory? Or would I let Rebecca experience the same humiliation she'd so casually inflicted on me? The choice was entirely mine to make, and for the first time in our relationship, Rebecca had no power to influence it. 3 weeks later, I stood in the conference room of our new office space, watching the Denver skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, while David finalized details with our latest client. The Technova partnership had opened doors we'd never expected, leading to inquiries from companies across the country. Digital Horizon Solutions had gone from a scrappy two-person operation to a legitimate player in the industry almost overnight. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now working in a glass tower not unlike the one where Rebecca had spent years climbing the pharmaceutical sales ladder. The difference was that this tower represented something I'd built rather than something I'd been hired into. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Rebecca's last day is Friday. She wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet for coffee sometime next week. No pressure if you're not ready. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar weight of unresolved family dynamics. Rebecca had been let go from her position 2 days after our hospital conversation, exactly as she'd feared. The termination had been framed as mutual separation, a face-saving gesture that fooled no one in their industry. Her 3-year track record hadn't been enough to survive the recent performance issues. The timing had been brutal. While my success was being celebrated in local business publications and industry newsletters, Rebecca was cleaning out her office and updating her LinkedIn profile with euphemistic language about seeking new opportunities. I hadn't spoken to her since that day in the hospital. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer support during what I knew was a devastating professional blow. But another part of me remembered years of condescension and dismissal, and wondered if Rebecca would have extended the same grace if our situations had been reversed. David finished his call and turned to me with the kind of energetic enthusiasm that had become his trademark since our partnership went public. That was Goldman Sachs. They want to discuss bringing us in for a complete digital transformation project. We're talking about potentially our biggest contract yet. That's amazing, I replied, though my mind was still on Michael's text. David studied my expression. You seem distracted. Everything okay? I showed him the message. David had become my closest confidant over the past few years, the one person who knew the full story of my family dynamics and my sister's treatment of my career. Are you going to meet with her? He asked. I don't know. Part of me thinks I should. She's going through exactly what she thought I was going through 3 weeks ago. And the other part? The other part remembers how she laughed when I told them about losing my job. How she spent years making me feel like a failure. I walked closer to the window, watching traffic move through the streets below. She's only apologizing now because she found out I was successful. If Digital Horizon Solutions had been struggling, would she have shown the same remorse? David leaned against the conference table. That's a fair question. But people do change, Joe. Sometimes crisis forces us to examine our behavior in ways we never would otherwise. Or sometimes crisis just makes people regret the consequences of their behavior, not the behavior itself. My phone rang before David could respond. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and I knew this conversation was inevitable. Hi, Mom. Joanna, honey. We need to talk about Rebecca. What about her? She lost her job, as I'm sure you know. And she's not handling it well. She's been staying in bed most days, barely eating. Michael's worried sick about her. I felt a familiar pang of guilt. Despite everything between us, the thought of Rebecca truly struggling made my chest tight. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? My mother's voice carried an edge I rarely heard from her. Because you haven't called or visited since she got out of the hospital. Your own sister is going through the worst time of her life, and you're nowhere to be found. Mom, the situation between Rebecca and me is complicated. It's not that complicated, Joanna. She made mistakes, she apologized, and now she needs support. That's what families do. That's what families should do, I corrected. But Rebecca didn't offer me support when she thought I was struggling. She offered lectures and condescension. She was trying to help in the only way she knew how. And I'm responding in the only way I know how. My mother was quiet for a moment. This isn't like you, Joanna. You've always been the compassionate one, the one who puts family first. Maybe that's been the problem, I said, surprising myself with the admission. Maybe I've been so busy putting family first that I forgot to put myself first occasionally. So what, you're just going to abandon your sister when she needs you most? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not rushing to fix a relationship that was broken long before Rebecca lost her job. After hanging up, I sat in the empty conference room for a long time, thinking about family dynamics and the weight of expectations. My mother was right that I'd always been the accommodating one, the sister who smoothed over conflicts and absorbed Rebecca's criticisms without much pushback. But success had changed my perspective on what I owed other people, even family members. David had left for another client meeting, so I was alone with my thoughts when my father called. I hear your mother talked to you about Rebecca, he said without preamble. She did. And? And I'm not sure what she expects me to do. Rebecca spent years treating me like a professional failure. Now that the tables have turned, I'm supposed to pretend that never happened? I'm not asking you to pretend anything, my father said. But I am asking you to consider the bigger picture here. Which is, Rebecca made mistakes. Significant ones. But she's acknowledged them, and she's paying for them now. The question is whether you want to be the kind of person who kicks someone when they're down, even if they deserve it. The words stung because they contained an uncomfortable truth. I wasn't kicking Rebecca while she was down, exactly, but I wasn't helping her up either. My absence during her crisis was its own form of punishment. Did Rebecca ask you to call me? I asked. No, she specifically asked us not to pressure you. She said she understood if you couldn't forgive her, and that she didn't want to make things worse by having family members guilt you into a reconciliation. This information surprised me. The Rebecca I knew would have mobilized every family member to advocate for her position. The fact that she'd specifically asked them not to pressure me suggested a level of self-awareness that was new. But, my father continued, I'm calling anyway because I love both of my daughters and I think you're making a mistake. How so? Because you're letting past hurts prevent you from being the person you actually are. The Joanna I raised wouldn't let pride get in the way of family, no matter how justified that pride might be. Maybe the Joanna you raised was too accommodating for her own good. Maybe, he admitted, but accommodation isn't the same thing as compassion. You can have boundaries and still show kindness. That evening, I drove to Rebecca and Michael's house in the suburbs, a decision I made impulsively after spending hours wrestling with my father's words. Their home was a testament to the kind of success Rebecca had always valued. Perfectly manicured lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, architectural details that spoke of careful investment in status symbols. Michael answered the door, looking relieved when he saw me. Joanna, thank you for coming. He paused, searching for words. She's been really struggling. I found Rebecca in their living room, curled up on the couch in sweatpants and an oversized sweater, staring at a muted television. She looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across her face. You came? She said simply. I came, I confirmed, taking the chair across from her. We sat in silence for several minutes. Rebecca looked different than I'd ever seen her, not just without makeup or professional clothes, but somehow diminished, as if losing her job had cost her more than just income. How are you holding up? I asked finally. Rebecca's laugh was hollow. I've been better. Turns out your entire identity being wrapped up in your job isn't great for mental health when that job disappears. I imagine not. The worst part isn't even the unemployment, she continued. It's realizing how much of my self-worth was tied to other people's perception of my success. Without the title and the salary and the company car, I don't know who I am anymore. I recognized the feeling she was describing, though my own experience had been different. When I'd left Morrison Associates, I'd had Digital Horizon Solutions to fall back on. Rebecca was facing the void without a safety net. Have you thought about what you want to do next? I asked. Honestly, I don't know. I've been in pharmaceutical sales for so long that it's all I know how to do, but I'm not sure I want to do it anymore. She looked at me directly. How did you know? When you decided to start your own business, how did you know it was the right choice? The question caught me off guard. Rebecca was asking for genuine advice, not offering unsolicited guidance for the first time in our adult relationship. I didn't know, I admitted. I just knew that staying in corporate marketing wasn't making me happy, and I had skills that I thought could translate to consulting. Most of it was trial and error. Were you scared? Terrified, I said honestly. There were months when I wasn't sure I'd be able to pay rent, but I was more scared of staying in a job that felt wrong than I was of failing at something that felt right. Rebecca nodded slowly. I think I've been so focused on security and stability that I forgot to consider whether I actually enjoyed what I was doing. When they fired me, my first emotion wasn't sadness or anger. It was relief. How messed up is that? It's not messed up at all. It's honest. Joanna, Rebecca said, shifting to face me more directly, I need to say something to you, and I need you to really hear it. I waited. I was wrong about everything. Not just wrong about your business or your capabilities, but wrong about what success looks like, what matters in a career, what it means to take risks. Her voice was steady but thick with emotion. You built something incredible while I was playing it safe and calling it wisdom. You took chances while I was clinging to false security. You were living courageously while I was living fearfully. Rebecca, no, let me finish. The way I treated you wasn't just unkind, it was ignorant. I couldn't see the value in what you were doing, because I was too narrow-minded to understand that there are different ways to be successful. I thought success meant climbing someone else's ladder, and I dismissed you for building your own ladder entirely. I felt tears prick at my eyes. This level of self-reflection from Rebecca was unprecedented, and it was making it harder to maintain my emotional distance. But here's what I need you to understand, she continued. My apology isn't contingent on my current situation. I'm not sorry because I lost my job and you succeeded. I'm sorry because I've spent 3 years being a terrible sister to someone who deserved better. How do I know that's true? I asked quietly. How do I know you wouldn't go back to the same patterns if you found another high-paying corporate job tomorrow? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I guess you don't know. I can't prove my sincerity except through my actions going forward, but I can tell you that losing my job forced me to examine my behavior in ways I never would have otherwise, and I don't like what I found. What did you find? That I was using your apparent struggles to make myself feel better about my own insecurities. That I was threatened by the possibility that you might be successful in ways I didn't understand or respect. That I was more invested in being right about your choices than in supporting you as a sister. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Rebecca was acknowledging not just her mistakes, but the motivations behind them. I can't undo 3 years of condescending comments and dismissive attitudes, she said, but I can commit to doing better if you're willing to give me the chance. I looked around their living room, taking in the expensive furniture and carefully curated decor that represented everything Rebecca had worked toward. Now it felt like a museum of misplaced priorities. Beautiful but ultimately empty. What would doing better look like? I asked. I don't know yet. That's part of what I need to figure out. But I know it starts with listening instead of lecturing, with supporting instead of trying to fix, with respecting your choices even when I don't understand them. Michael appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to each of us, then tactfully disappeared back into the kitchen. "Rebecca," I said after taking a sip, "I appreciate your apology, I really do. But I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't something I can flip like a switch. There's a lot of hurt to work through." "I know. And I'm prepared to be patient while you work through it. I don't expect instant forgiveness or for things to go back to how they were before." "Good, because they can't go back. Too much has changed." "Maybe that's for the best," Rebecca said. "Maybe the relationship we had before wasn't healthy for either of us." We talked for another hour about practical things. Her job search, my business expansion, our parents' reactions to recent events. The conversation felt different from any we'd had in years, marked by genuine curiosity instead of barely concealed judgment. As I prepared to leave, Rebecca walked me to the door. "Joanna, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you succeed, really succeed, beyond what even you expected, does it feel like you thought it would?" I considered the question carefully. In some ways, yes. There's satisfaction in proving that my choices were valid, in building something meaningful, but it's also lonelier than I expected. Success doesn't solve relationship problems or make family dynamics less complicated. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. I think I've been chasing the wrong kind of success my whole adult life. The kind that looks impressive from the outside but doesn't necessarily feel fulfilling from the inside. What kind of success do you want now?" "I'm not sure yet. Something that feels authentic to who I actually am, rather than who I think I should be." She paused. "Maybe something that would make you proud to call me your sister." The comment hit me harder than I expected. "Rebecca, despite everything between us, I've never been ashamed to call you my sister. Frustrated, hurt, angry, yes, but not ashamed. Even when I was being awful to you? Even then, your family. That doesn't change, even when everything else does." 3 months later, I received a text from Rebecca that made me smile for the first time in weeks. She'd started her own consulting practice, helping pharmaceutical companies improve their client relationship strategies. Her first client was a small biotech firm that couldn't afford the big consulting companies, but needed expert guidance on building sustainable business relationships. "First-month revenue exceeded my most optimistic projections," her text read. "Turns out there was an entrepreneur hiding under all that corporate conditioning. Who knew?" I called her immediately. "Congratulations, how does it feel?" "Terrifying and exhilarating and completely different from anything I've ever done," she replied, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "I'm working 16-hour days, but they're my 16-hour days, you know?" "I know exactly what you mean." "Joanna, I owe you an apology I never gave you." "Another one?" "For not understanding that this feeling, this sense of building something meaningful, was what you were chasing all along. I thought you were avoiding responsibility when you were actually taking more responsibility than I ever had." "Rebecca, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because now I understand what you sacrificed to build Digital Horizon Solutions. The security, the predictable income, the safety net of corporate benefits. You gave up all of that to create something authentic, and I mocked you for it." We talked for an hour about the challenges of entrepreneurship, the loneliness of being your own boss, the satisfaction of succeeding on your own terms. For the first time in our adult lives, we were speaking as equals, two women who had chosen difficult paths and were learning to navigate them with courage and integrity. "There's something else," Rebecca said as our conversation was winding down. "Michael and I are getting divorced." I was quiet, absorbing this information. "I'm sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm sad, but not surprised. We've been growing apart for years, and my career crisis just highlighted how incompatible we'd become. He wants someone who shares his vision of success, and I want to figure out my own vision. That's brave. It's necessary. I can't build an authentic life while pretending to be someone I'm not in my marriage." 6 months after that conversation, Rebecca and I had coffee together for the first time in over a year. She looked different. Not just physically, though she'd cut her hair short and was wearing jeans instead of a business suit, but fundamentally different. More relaxed, more genuine, more like the sister I remembered from childhood. "How's the business?" I asked. "Good, really good. I have 6 regular clients now, and I'm turning down work because I'm at capacity. It turns out that understanding pharmaceutical sales from the inside gives me credibility that external consultants don't have." "And how do you feel about it?" "Like I'm finally doing work that matters. Work that uses my actual skills and experience rather than just my ability to hit arbitrary targets." She paused. "I understand now why you were so reluctant to give up freelancing for a corporate job. There's something addictive about being responsible for your own success." We talked about our businesses, our parents, our plans for the future. The conversation felt natural in a way that surprised me, free from the undercurrent of competition and judgment that had characterized our relationship for years. "Joanna," Rebecca said as we prepared to leave, "I want you to know something. Watching you build Digital Horizon solutions, seeing how you've handled success with grace and integrity, it's been inspiring. You've shown me what it looks like to stay true to yourself while achieving extraordinary things." "Thank you." "That means a lot coming from you. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I hope someday we can be real sisters again. Not the competitive, resentful versions we became, but genuine friends who support each other." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I barely recognized. The condescending, status-obsessed woman who had laughed at my career choices had been replaced by someone more humble, more authentic, more worthy of respect. "I'd like that too," I said, and meant it. A year later, Rebecca and I were both featured in a Denver Business Journal article about women entrepreneurs disrupting traditional industries. The photo showed us standing side by side outside my office building, smiling genuinely for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. The article quoted Rebecca saying, "My sister taught me that success isn't about climbing someone else's ladder, it's about building your own ladder and helping other people build theirs too. Sometimes the people who laugh at your dreams are the ones who need to see them come true the most. Not because they deserve the satisfaction of your success, but because they need to learn what real success looks like." Rebecca lost everything she thought mattered: her job, her marriage, her sense of identity. And in losing those things, she found something more valuable: the courage to build a life that was actually hers. As for me, I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past or pretending hurt never happened. It's about choosing to build something better from the pieces that remain. We never did go back to being the sisters we were before. We became something better. 2 women who respected each other's choices, supported each other's dreams, and understood that success comes in many forms. But the most meaningful kind is the one you build with your own hands. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.